Jewish journey, their story, chosen by members of the staff to talk to us about the impact that Judaism has had on their life. This year, we have 4 wonderful members of our congregation who are going to share their stories. We're going to start with Ann Weiner, followed by Bob Pollack, then Sophia Lamelli Azabel, and finally Brad Belden. In between each of their presentations, we'll get to listen to some wonderful live music, excerpts from some of our concerts that we've had throughout the last few months. And with that, we invite you to relax and enjoy and learn something more, always inspirational and fascinating about fellow members of Temple Beth-El. So Anne, I invite you to turn on your screen and start your presentation.
There. Lashana Tova and Gamar Chatima Tova. It is with a lot of humbleness that I speak to you today because I'm not exactly sure why I was picked with all the other people that are here. But Yom Kippur, a day of reflection, a day of atonement, and then hopefully a day of redemption. When I was a kid, it was a day I went to synagogue with my family. And if I got cold, my dad would give me his suit jacket to wear. And that is mainly what I remember. When I was in college and a young adult, I did very little in the way of weekly temple services, but I always wanted to go to the high holiday services. And then when I got married and became a mother, that Judaism became a huge part of my identity. I often wonder if it was my Jewishness that made me go into the caring profession. And if it wasn't the main reason, I'm sure it was part of the reason. So fast forward a lot of years, here I am in San Antonio, and getting older does not mean that you stop learning. In fact, I learn new things every day, and some are the traditions handed down from the very tight-knit community that I raised my family in, but most was from looking around and seeing the need that is everywhere around us. While my kids were at home, I volunteered some, mostly revolving around them, but as they got older, social action called to me. So much need, and I had so little time back then. Moving to San Antonio and joining the congregation of Beth-El opened my eyes to the poverty that surrounds our city. True, it is everywhere, not just in San Antonio, but here I found it laid out in front of me. And I think part of that is from Temple Beth-El, because they are so strong in the social action. A student whose parents abandoned them is living with her grandparents and needed a mentor, someone to encourage her. At Christmas, the first responders need to work and miss dinner with their families. Creating that meal with Roger takes a village, so to speak. The Haven of Hope serves 3 meals a day, every day at the St. Vinny's Kitchen. At Christmas, our congregation covers the serving so our Christian friends can enjoy their holiday. As an aside, you have never seen such appreciative people. Regular serving shifts are also available throughout the year if anyone's interested. With the economic shutdown from COVID-19, another huge need in our city came to the front. The San Antonio Food Bank is now distributing an amazing amount of food throughout the community. People who would never have thought they would have to take charity line up for huge mobile food distributions. These distributions take many man hours, and each donated hours is money that the food bank has. It doesn't have to pay people to do this. It's like giving a donation, but only with your time. It allows them to use their funds they have for food instead of personnel. There are so many ways to volunteer there for the food bank. Go online, pull up the calendar, call me if you need help. It is a really satisfying experience. Everyone who drives up on the mobile distributions, they're just so appreciative. So sure, much can be accomplished by simply donating money, and for those who have plenty, That is definitely important. But giving your time can be more meaningful to you in the end. I know this sounds like a volunteer promotion, but it does address the impact of Judaism on my life. We are instructed in the Torah to leave the corners of our fields unharvested so that the poor can come and harvest a portion. We are told justice and right are the paths we should take. We learn that mercy, although often difficult, is the right choice. The hard part is finding an opportunity that interests you. I also volunteer for the Be Smart for Kids gun safety program and the TEDx San Antonio project, all trying to get information out to the community. So many ways to give back. And by the way, if you have not seen the film Impact that was funded by NCJW, it is about the effect that the San Antonio Jews had on San Antonio. And it is the most amazing film I think I ever saw. As I am obviously not a native, I was amazed and felt really proud to be part of such an important Jewish community. The Jews have placed themselves in every aspect of this city. It made me realize even more the importance of social action. If you see something, say something. This Yom Kippur, of course, we remember Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who as a young lawyer attacked norms that have been around for centuries. Why should women make more than men or as much as men? Why should a person taking care of an elderly parent receive financial assistance? Why should women have their own bank account or own their own homes? In the words of her rabbi in Washington, RBG did not go about making history. She just corrected wrongs one situation at a time. If we as Jews see and participate in just one small aspect of a correction, it would be enough. She made it possible for me to be what I am today, a credit card carrying woman. Lastly, a previous rabbi of RBG's made a statement that really stuck with me. If one of us has the power to change the world, we all have the power to change the world. Tikkun Olam, heal the earth. Gamar Hatima Tova, and on this day, may you be written for a good year. Thank you.
I want to thank Rabbi Nathan for inviting me to share my thoughts with you today. Looking back, Judaism has impacted and continues to impact every facet of my life. A good metaphor for me is in the familiar song, Al Shlosha Devarim. The world stands on three things: Torah, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim. Torah, prayer, and deeds of loving kindness. According to Maimonides, human existence could not be maintained if not for these things. My life stands on these pillars. Torah. When I first heard and sung this song, it seemed pretty straightforward. Torah, I knew what it was, I knew where it was, I even knew some of the Torah portions. But the Torah is not just the written Torah, it includes all the oral Torah, the teachings of the scholars and rabbis of the past, and all the teachings that are passed down from our parents, family, and friends. All the things we learn and the ethical dilemmas we solve are part of our oral Torah. You start to learn the oral Torah from your parents. I remember when I was young, my father would take me along on Shiva visits. At one point, I told him that it wasn't much fun and I didn't want to go. He told me that it was our responsibility as Jews to visit others at these times. I don't think I understood, but it seemed important and I never questioned going again. So early on, I learned that there were certain Jewish responsibilities, mitzvot, that we were obligated to carry out, to live an ethical life. I went off to college. Three important things happened. One, I graduated. Two, I was commissioned second lieutenant in the Army. And three, and most important, I met Charlotte, and we have been together ever since. Each one of those events is worth a whole book in my oral Torah. But I think you can envision their titles: family, career, service to country. For me, writing my oral Torah also has to do with learning new things. I started to attend Torah study regularly as I got older. I felt that the written Torah had lessons to teach me about what was going on in my everyday life. I believe that when you find one of those lessons, it's an aha moment. It's like Torah being revealed on Sinai. It's revelation. At one time, a new couple moved directly across the street from us. I came to find out that one of our new neighbors was a registered sex offender. I didn't want to be friendly with this person due to his past. What was the Jewish response? A wise rabbi advised me that you don't have to be friends, but if he fell off a ladder, you are obligated to help him. A living example of how Judaism impacts my life. We moved a bunch of times, and we had faith that we would find a friendly community at our new destination. Our shared values made it easier to find a welcoming place in San Antonio and at Beth-El. Avodah. I have always understood the Hebrew word avodah to mean work. I know in the context of Shalosh Devarim, it is also translated as prayer or ritual. I like the word work. I think prayer is work. Prayer is not a Netflix movie where you can sit back and be fully engaged. Prayer takes effort to stay focused and not be distracted. Age has given me the patience to focus that I couldn't do when I was younger. I've heard people say that prayer doesn't do anything for me. I feel that prayer is like a checking account. You have to make lots of small deposits for many years so you can make big withdrawals in times of need. At one point in my early career, we moved to a new city so I could take a job with a Fortune 500 company. About 6 months after we moved, the company was sold and I was laid off. My prayer account was about to be overdrawn. Consequently, I did not handle the situation very well. Fortunately, I had a strong wife and family that supported me. When you are in the midst of a crisis, it's hard to believe what the rabbis taught. This too shall pass, and when it does, it will be a blessing. I was blessed with an important lesson. You are not your job. The lesson has served me well in retirement. I've never longed for the status or perks that came with my jobs. Prayer also includes our rituals and traditions. It links us to the past and the future. When we moved to San Antonio and joined Beth-El, we knew that there would be the same prayer book and the same prayers. It made moving less daunting. Gemilut Hasadim, deeds of loving kindness. Sometimes we think of this as tikkun olam. To me, it means treating everyone with respect. I remember many years ago hearing a story about Shlomo Karabakh telling the cab driver how important his job was. The cab driver demurred to Karabakh, saying, "No, you are the great rabbi." Karabakh replied, "If not for you, I could not have been driven to my engagement. You too are important." I have followed that principle throughout my life. Every person and every person's job is important. The private is important as the general. They just have different jobs to do. In Akron, I had the great fortune to have had many leadership roles in our synagogue. I always felt that this was sacred work, no matter how mundane or frustrating the task at the moment. Our synagogue in Akron was founded in 1865, and I feel that Temple Israel in Akron, like Beth-El in San Antonio, will be serving Jews for hundreds of years into the future. Unlike my business work, where the end of the month sales were so important, working for the temple has a very long horizon. You truly do not have to finish the work in your term or even your lifetime. Just as my father planted for me, I am planting for my children and grandchildren. Judaism has a long history of social action and supporting worthwhile causes, values that I try to practice every day. When someone asks me why I do certain things, often the answer is that it's a Jewish value. It's a Jewish value to commemorate someone's life with a donation. It's a Jewish value to volunteer at the food bank or the diaper bank. I never say I needed to fill a few hours of my day, which may be true, but I do feel that I make these choices because they are mitzvot. It makes my days meaningful. At this holiday season, unlike any time in our lives, we need to remember that time moves forward whether we are ready or not. Our holidays are a time of hope for better days to come. This too shall pass, and when it does, it will be a blessing. From my family to yours, Lashana Tova Tikatevu, may you be written in the book of life for a good year.
Hello, everybody. My name is Noemi Sofia Azubel, and I've been a member of Temple Beth-El since 2003, the year that our family moved from Los Angeles to San Antonio. I was 7 months pregnant with our second child, our daughter, Arlette, and we already had a 2-year-old boy, Alexander, who is now away at college, and he's 19. When Rabbi Mara asked me today to speak to the congregation, I was at a loss in terms of what I can possibly share that was interesting with our Jewish community. And all I could think of is to share my Jewish experience as a young person trying to figure out my place in the world. So let me take you back to my Jewish upbringing in my home country of Uruguay. I was born in this small country of just 3 million back in 1972, and 1 million of those, that population lives in the capital of Montevideo. For those of you who don't know where Uruguay is, it's between Argentina and Brazil on the Atlantic coast. There were about 10,000 Jews living at the capital of about 1 million, so it's not too different a ratio of the number of Jews living here in San Antonio. I guess one of the things that makes Uruguay different than most South American countries is that although the majority of the population claims to be Catholic, few are devout. The country as a whole leans secular. The country offers free university education, and there's actually compulsory voting. So growing up in this small country, I did not feel special being a Jew. I felt different. I knew I was different than the rest, and not in a good way. When you're a kid, different is not good. Kids like to blend in, and I was not necessarily blending in with my mostly Catholic neighborhood. The Jewish community seemed to live in a certain part of town along the coast, where we all attended private Jewish school. I did not live too far from the school, but it was not walking distance. This meant that the majority of my time was spent with neighborhood friends, not Jewish ones. The Jewish school I attended from age 5 to 13 was half day of it was in Spanish. We learned math and grammar and literature, and then the other half was in Hebrew. All of the Hebrew teachers were native Israelis who spoke very little Spanish. So it was really an immersion into Hebrew. These teachers were sort of missionaries where they traveled around the world teaching and living abroad. I am ashamed to say that I remember very little Hebrew from those days, although when I overhear it, I catch myself understanding phrases and words that I didn't even know I knew. So I grew up in Uruguay in the 70s and early 80s, always feeling different, like I did not belong. Although Uruguay is a relatively peaceful country, we do not have a national army. We're one of those 2 countries in South America, in Latin America, that don't have an army, the other one being Costa Rica. But in my mind, stories of bombing attacks on synagogues, especially in Argentina, were always concerning. There was always subtle anti-Semitism on the streets, and I would often overhear racist remarks from strangers, not knowing that I was Jewish. Let me digress by telling you a little bit about my family background, which only helped to make me feel even more different growing up. At that time, the Jewish community in Uruguay was composed of both Sephardic and Ashkenazi Jews, but the majority were Ashkenazi. And each sect had their own congregation, depending on your socioeconomic class and whether you were Ashkenazi or Sephardic. You would spend your high holidays celebrating at different temples. My father's family being Sephardic and my mother's Ashkenazi, I felt I belonged nowhere. I guess at the time of my parents' nuptials, it was a big deal to marry someone who was not your type. My father's family was expelled from Egypt in 1956. Stripped from their Egyptian citizenship, they fled to Italy. They lived as refugees for 1 year in Genoa, Italy, and then made the long trip to South America. So the family relocated to Uruguay without any papers, literally undocumented, since the passports had been confiscated. My paternal grandparents had both been born in Egypt, but my great-grandparents were all from Turkey. They arrived in Uruguay with hidden jewelry, gems sewn into their coats, because Egypt had not allowed them to leave with any of their valuables. So they hastily sold their store and apartment, and moved their young 3 children to Uruguay. My father, being the oldest, age 13, interestingly had his bar mitzvah in Uruguay. My father and grandparents spoke French, very little Arabic, and my grandparents and my great-grandmother that came along spoke Ladino to each other. So Ladino resembles a great deal to Spanish, as this is a sort of old Spanish mixed with Hebrew and some other Mediterranean countries' languages that comes from the time of the Iberian Peninsula and the Sephardic Jews in Spain. So in essence, this side of my family got expelled twice from their lands. First in 1492 during the Spanish Inquisition, and again in 1956 from Egypt. My mother's family, a little different, was certainly a lot poorer and less educated than my father's side. My maternal grandparents were Lithuanian refugees that escaped poverty and violence from small rural villages. In 1930, they escaped a bleak future of pogroms and poverty and traveled independently by boat to Uruguay. They were both in their early 20s. They were among the lucky ones because the rest of their family, they had lots of siblings, 11 to 15 siblings each. Grandparents and extended family all perished during the Holocaust. My maternal grandparents had no formal education. They had a trade. My grandmother was a seamstress and my grandpa was a welder. And 12 years after arriving in Uruguay, my mother was born in 1942. So circling back to me, growing up in Uruguay, the last thing I wanted was to be different. I often hid my Jewish identity, and I would certainly not volunteer that information to strangers. It was a lot easier to fit in that way. Fast forward to 1985, I was 13 when my parents emigrated to Los Angeles. I'm now thrown into this very multicultural society. I had never in my life seen a Chinese or Korean person. Black Americans were completely foreign to me, not to mention Pakistani, Filipinos. It was a culture shock, to say the least. Surprisingly, I adjusted relatively well to this new world. It took me about a year. And I was finally in a town where everybody was different. And if everybody was different, a stranger in their own land, that made me average. And I absolutely loved that. That melting pot suited me just fine. I always knew that education was my salvation. So I graduated from college in Los Angeles, immediately jumped into law school and moved to San Francisco. I did extensive traveling around the world and got to experience many cultures firsthand. As I experienced the world, I got a new appreciation of my Jewishness. I no longer felt that Jewishness made me a stranger or different. Instead, I started to feel kind of special. I felt especially proud of Reform Judaism's stance on social justice, and I found my place. In large part due to the inequality, discrimination, oppression that we as Jews have endured over the generations, we place a higher standard of care to our lives and are obliged to be more tolerant and more giving. As to my family, my present family, my husband and our 3 children, social justice is of utmost importance. Our family simply does not stand for racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, Islamophobia, transphobia, classism, xenophobia, or any other isms. So we have these amazing 3 children. 1 is in college and 2 are in high school, and they're unbelievably resilient. They've always gone to public school, where 99% of the student population is not Jewish. So they should feel as different as I did growing up, yet they're comfortable in their own skin. When our oldest Alexander was in the 6th grade, he had to perform a holiday orchestra concert, and he came home to declare that he was going to wear his yarmulke for it. During holiday concerts, kids are allowed to wear festive hats. The vast majority are wearing Santa hats. Our kid did not hesitate to grab his yarmulke. He knew who he was. No doubts. I credit his courage in large part to Temple Beth-El. So his win is my win. He has succeeded where I couldn't. He is braver. He was better than me, which is exactly what every Jewish mother wants for their own kids, that their lives are better than your own. So the future is bright, despite these chaotic times we live in. I really feel strongly, witnessing our children, that this young generation is coming to save us from ourselves. Thanks.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. Is being Black different? You bet. Is being Hispanic different? You bet. Is being Asian different? You bet. Is being Jewish different? You bet. Celebrating the holidays without a Christmas tree, missing school and work for high holidays, having a bar mitzvah, or serving on the board of directors of Jewish agencies. These are all ways that I'm different. Being Jewish is different, but I'm proud that it makes me different. Ironically, my first recollection of a religious event was receiving my New York Jets football outfit. I was under 5 years old, but I proudly wore the green and white while everyone else on the street was wearing blue and white. It was my Hanukkah gift, and I was going to wear it no matter what anyone thought. Living in Texas, they said, "This is cowboy land," but I didn't listen. It was my Hanukkah gift, and I didn't care. Despite looking different, I still fit in. The other kids still wanted me to play. And even though I was the slowest kid on the street, and probably still am, I got to suit up with the big boys. As we grew older, my next childhood experience of being different was attending Shabbat services at Temple Beth-El with my grandparents, Maury and Ann Belden. They marched all 12 of us grandkids in with them, and we sat in the back right so as not to disturb anyone. Many things went wrong with that strategy. First, you cannot march 12 cousins in together and expect them to be quiet. Being different started to become normal for me, and it was something I was proud of. However, things escalated quickly as I got older. As a 7th grader in middle school, I decided to run for class president. At the time, I was unfamiliar with anti-Semitism. Suddenly, kids I grew up with, my friends, turned against me. Things quickly deteriorated. I was called horrible things. Swastikas were drawn on my house, and I was bullied at recess. Months of incredible harassment turned into fear. I received death threats. It eventually got out of control and the police became involved. Please understand, this was Jackson Middle School in a nice middle-class neighborhood on the north side of town. Even more concerning, this was a middle school election. I will never understand how something so innocent grew into my first experience with anti-Semitism. This was the first time I didn't want to be different. Unfortunately, 30 plus years later, one would only hope that anti-Semitism had ended, but it hadn't. When our daughter Dylan was in 4th grade, we chose to send her to a new school because she was bullied for being Jewish. This private school, not too far from Temple Beth-El, was our plan to escape the harassment she was suffering. Sure, Susan was upset, but I personally knew how Dylan felt, and it was not something I wanted her to experience. Unfortunately, even in a sheltered environment at this private school, the headmaster was unsuccessful at preventing her from being bullied, simply because she was Jewish. Close to mid-year break, Dylan came home crying. Yet again, more meetings with the headmaster and no luck. Finally, she came to us and said, "Mommy and Daddy, it was bad at my old school, but it's much worse here. Can I please go back?" We pulled her out the next day. Anti-Semitism wasn't just at a private school either. When our son Marshall was a freshman at Churchill High School, a boy on his golf team refused to drive him to golf practice because he was Jewish. To make matters worse, the teammate actually told Marshall that his parents wouldn't let him drive a Jew. To add insult to injury, another teammate peed on Marshall's golf clubs. The bullying was relentless. Eventually, Marshall decided to quit the team. It's hard to comprehend that even in this current climate, one where every culture, race, gender, etc., is being embraced and condemnation for being different is coming to an end, anti-Semitism is still alive. A large number of hate crimes in New York last year were attacks on Jewish people. Susan and I are concerned about the world our future grandkids will be born into. Will being different be acceptable? Will anti-Semitism continue its groundswell? It's a world of whats that keep us up at night, worrying about the next generation. Then I ask myself, was it really different for our parents? In the grand scheme, probably not. Unfortunately, our grandchildren will be different too, and they'll find ways to succeed because that's what Jews do. We don't give up. We play the game to win. But being different is also a blessing. I remember in the 2008-2009 time period when times were very difficult at work, we had lost most of our customer base, similar to the 80s. The economy was falling apart, and like many, we were struggling to make payroll. In the weekly check run at work, I noticed a charitable contribution payment. I went to my father's office and said, Dad, I cannot possibly help them at this time. My father looked me straight in the eye and said, if not us, who? Being Jewish and caring for others is part of our heritage. It's in our blood. It's part of the core values of what it is to be different. It's part of the core values of what it is to be Jewish. As empty nesters, our kids are now out of the house. However, COVID enabled many of us to share Passover together. It brought back those fond memories of chaos. It brought back those fond memories of passing along those lessons taught to us by our parents and our grandparents. Despite having to include most of the family on Zoom, which was different, it's who we are. It's what we are. It's being Jewish. It's being the chosen one. Maybe it's that hate, that fear, the heritage, the being different, which drives us to excel. As mentioned earlier in my remarks, something unique drives Jews to want to be better. It drives us to say, we can be anything we want. When we look back at the oppression our ancestors experienced, it can be summed up in 3 words. We are different. And I'm happy being different. Personally, the greatest core value I've appreciated the most is that of integrity. Both sets of my grandparents, as well as my parents, insisted on integrity. Susan and I have taught our kids since they were young that life is about integrity. You can make a lot of money and lose it. You can eat well and exercise, but you can be stricken with illness. The only thing you have complete control of in your life is your integrity. Own it. It's a gift handed down from generation to generation. Is having integrity different? That's a great question, but I know being Jewish has played a significant role in my obsession of integrity. At my age, I need Tylenol more frequently than before. I don't sleep like I used to, and I forget things from time to time, but I haven't forgotten what it's like to be Jewish. I live it every day. We are different, but those things we think are normal is what makes us special and proud to be Jewish. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being different, just like me.
This afternoon, we learned so much from our congregants. From Anne, we learned about the importance of how a foundation in Tikkun Olam can help encourage us to build more connections to our Judaism, to our families, to those in our Jewish community, and those in our city, state, nation, and worldwide communities. From Bob, we learned about the three things on which Judaism stands: Torah, Avodah, and Gimilut Chasadim. We learned that oral Torah gives us the connections to our past generations and to the words in the Torah itself. We learned that prayer takes work. We learned the importance of continuity in our world and helping those around us. From Sophia, we learned that not everyone has the same Jewish history. We learned how diverse our Temple Beth-El community is and how lucky we are to be such a diverse congregation. We learned how resiliency is inherent in our Jewish stories, in all of our different stories. From Brad, we learned to be proud of who we are as Jews. We learned that anti-Semitism is around us, but that we can rise above it and be who we are. We learned that we do not give up. We learned that we still need to care for others and own our own integrity. Let these stories and words inspire us not just today, but every day. As Anne shared, may we remember the importance of healing the world together as one. As Bob shared, may we remember that not everything comes easy, but that Gam Ze Ya'avor, this too shall pass, and we will be able to come together again in person soon. As Sophia shared, may we be proud of our Judaism, no matter who we are or where we are living. As Brad shared, may we rise above any anti-Semitism and be better. May we take all of this with us in the year and beyond. Gamar Chatima Tova. Our first study session will begin at 2:15 on Zoom with Rabbi Stahl. Please go to our website to register for that class.